Great.
Attendees. It's weird not seeing people. Hi, folks. We're going to get started in a minute. People are clicking in, signing in. Just to make sure you're in the right place, this is a webinar on tuition equity, featuring a partnership between the Department of Higher Education and Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the Massachusetts School Counselors Association. I'm going to promote Bob. Hi, Bob. Just going to give us another minute and then we'll introduce ourselves.
Okay.
You New Northers are everywhere.
All right. We had about 440 people registered, about 114 of us here now. I know some people registered just so they get the recording and hear from my friend Dina at Department of Higher Education. This session is on tuition equity. This is one of many efforts, I believe. I worked for the department for 22 years. I'm a part of the administration to really build equitable services around college admissions for all of our students. So we're very excited about all these changes that are happening and trying to get our college access numbers up. This event's being co-sponsored by my friend, the executive director of MASCA, Bob Bardwell. Bob, do you want to introduce yourself and kind of talk a little bit?
Sure. And I'll just say thank you to Niall, folks at DESE and to DHE for putting this on. It obviously has a lot of interest and importance to our counselors as well as our students and families. So thank you for doing this, and I look forward to being a participant.
Great. We're going to ask people to use the chat for questions and stuff. Dina's become a real pro on this whole thing. In the background is Alina Kuras from the Department of Higher Education. She is the maestra behind the whole operation. But now I'm going to turn over to Dina.
Thank you, Niall, and thank you, Bob, and everyone who helped coordinate this event. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to counselors. Thank everyone. I want to thank everyone in attendance today, not only for your time and attention to this exciting new law, but also for the tremendous work you do day to day in helping to support and guide our students for college and career readiness and leverage all available opportunities, including the one that I'm about to talk to you about today, to help students meet their goals and to meet their full potential. So I'm going to share my screen. It's loading. Okay, you should be able to see it now. It's taking a while to load from the beginning, so let's give it a minute. There we go. Okay. Great. Thank you for the thumbs up. So I am very pleased to provide you all today with a summary of the new Massachusetts tuition equity law. This is a new law that was signed into effect in late summer in August, but it was given a retroactive effective date, to the beginning of the fiscal year, July 1, 2023. What the legislature did in passing this new law is they created a new pathway for students to establish eligibility for the state tuition rate, the in-state tuition rate, and for state financial aid programs, irrespective, for the most part, of the student's immigration status. And by way of background, before the law, there was only one main pathway for students to establish eligibility for in-state tuition, and that was to show that the student was a legal permanent resident of Massachusetts, which basically included showing that the student was either a U.S. citizen or had a very specific lawful immigration status recognized under federal law. That pathway still exists, and it can still be used by students. And in another slide, I'll get into why it's important to know about that traditional existing pathway. But the law did create another pathway for those not eligible under the traditional model, and we are calling that pathway high school completer status. So who is a high school completer under this new law? To qualify as a high school completer, the student applicant must have attended high school in the Commonwealth in Massachusetts for at least 3 years, must have earned a diploma or the equivalent, such as a GED or HiSET, in the Commonwealth again, and the student must have met other documentation requirements, which I'll review on the next slide. Any and all students can use this more efficient, additional new pathway to access the in-state tuition rate and state financial aid at our institutions. But what this new law did is it extended access to the in-state tuition rate and state financial aid programs to certain non-US citizens, namely to undocumented students who meet the high school completer requirements listed above and the documentation requirements that are listed on this next slide. So to be eligible for high school completer status, the documentation requirements are that the student must provide either a valid social security number or documentation showing that the student was issued an individual taxpayer ID number, or documentation of registration with selective service, if applicable to the student's gender, or if the individual is not a citizen or a legal permanent resident of the United States, the person must simply provide a completed affidavit stating that the individual will file an application to become a citizen or legal permanent resident within 120 days after the individual becomes eligible to do so. Basically, it means the student promises to file to become a citizen if and when the federal government ever passes a law that allows the student to apply for citizenship or lawful permanent residency, basically the DREAMER Act. So how do students apply? To help implement this new tuition equity law, the department has developed and issued implementation procedures, which are available on our website, along with a uniform single application affidavit form that students must fill out and institutions must use to assess students' eligibility under the new tuition equity law. Students seeking to access the in-state tuition rate or financial aid must submit the completed document to the institution where they are intending to be enrolled, because basically each Massachusetts public college or university continues to be responsible for determining the tuition status for its respective students. So the process for submitting the application will be organized at the student's campus. And the reason I'm emphasizing this point is that we've already received a number of questions regarding the implementation of the new law. And a frequent question that we've received is whether the student should be submitting the application and affidavit directly to our office, to the Department of Higher Ed, or to our Office of Student Financial Assistance. And no, this is part of the application process at the institution where the student intends to enroll, or if the student's already enrolled and seeking to be reclassified at the institution where the student is already enrolled. Once eligible for the in-state tuition rate, after submitting the application and the affidavit and being assessed to be eligible by the institution, the student is automatically eligible for consideration for all state financial aid programs under the same terms as other individuals. It just basically means that the student only needs to submit this affidavit in form once to the institution to which the student is applying. But I do want to stress that eligibility for consideration for financial aid does not guarantee access. It's not an entitlement. The student will automatically be eligible for the in-state tuition rates, but what this affidavit form and application does is it makes the student eligible for consideration for state financial aid programs. It removes the impediment of the student's immigration status. So the student will be eligible once they sign the affidavit for consideration for state financial aid under the same terms as other students, provided the student individual meets each term of the financial aid program for which the student is applying. So the creation of a uniform application affidavit by the department was intended to be helpful both for students and for families, as well as for college and university administrators. So for administrators, the affidavit seeks to facilitate intake of student aid applications and assessment And for students and families, the affidavit fulfills all statutory documentation requirements for high school completer status if the student does not have a social security number or a taxpayer ID number. The affidavit has clear language that allows the student to attest to the requirements for high school completer status, including the attestation that the student will apply for citizenship or legal permanent residence status within 120 days of being eligible to do so, should the federal government change the laws in this area. I do want to note that under the current law, students must also show proof of selective service filing if eligible per the legislation. We've already received a lot of questions about this requirement, with folks in the financial aid offices noting that this is somewhat of an outdated requirement. This used to be required in the FAFSAs. It is no longer a FAFSA requirement. However, the law that was passed in Massachusetts continues to have this requirement. Other states who have passed the tuition equity laws or similar tuition equity laws in their states, and there are 24 states that went before us, have slowly been also eliminating this requirement because it's not aligned with current expectations in the current FAFSA. We are taking a look at this and are having conversations with the legislature about this requirement. But for now, unfortunately, it still remains a requirement of the law, and students who are applying must show proof of selective service filing. I will say some campuses have said that this has not been a problem. It is an individual student choice, but a lot of campuses have said that this has not been prohibitive for some of their male students in applying for the in-state tuition rate and state financial aid through the high school completer status, but we're keeping an eye on it this year. So what I've done on this slide and in the next couple of slides is I've provided you a snapshot of what this uniform application and form looks like. This form, along with our implementation procedures, are available on our website, so please feel free to take a look at both at your convenience. But this slide shows you the heart of the document and what it looks like. It's a fairly straightforward one-page document, one-page application. The first item, number 1, that you see on this slide, notes that individuals with certain immigration statuses specifically referenced in the law are not eligible to use high school completer status as a pathway to access the in-state tuition rate and state financial aid. Namely, the immigration statuses that are listed in the code cited here in item number 1 are those of diplomatic officials or those students who might be here on certain visas and authorized to work, study, or visit in the United States on a short-term temporary basis. High school completer status is not available to students with those immigration statuses. We've already received a question asking us to present a user-friendly guide on what those immigration statuses are, and we are working on that with immigration advocates. We have a first draft, and we hope to be able to post that on our website shortly. Item number 2 and 3 on this document, both of the documents noted in item 2 and 3 will be submitted through the application process, namely proof of high school attendance, that will be on the student's transcript, and the acquisition of a high school diploma or the equivalent. That should be submitted in the student's application materials. I stress that to note that the financial aid officers should not be asking students to resubmit this information if this information was already received by the institution through the application process. Item 4 notes that if eligible, the student has registered for federal military selective service. Again, that is a requirement of the law, but we are reviewing that and keeping track of data relevant to whether this requirement is proving to be prohibitive. And finally, item number 5, this is the heart of the affidavit. And this is the item that lists the documentation requirements that the students can provide, A, B, and C, proof of valid social security number, taxpayer ID number, or proof of registration with selective services. And if none of those 3 documents are available, if the student cannot provide those, then the student will be attesting that the student will apply for citizenship or legal permanent residence if and when the student is able to do so under federal law within 120 days of being eligible for such status. And the next slide, which is also a snapshot from the affidavit, shows you exactly what the attestation, how the attestation language reads. And the student simply signs the document and the financial aid officer files this document. The last part of the affidavit is the typical part of a form that you see that notes for internal use only. And this is the section that will be used by the financial aid officers at the institutions to note that they've received the relevant documentation if it's available. And if not, they have the attestation of the student. And then on the right-hand side, the financial aid officer notes whether the student is eligible or ineligible for the in-state tuition rate. So again, that is available on our website. I do want to talk a little bit about implementation, but before I do, I want to note that we've received a couple of questions or concerns rather about the affidavit, with some folks saying that it's not very user-friendly, it's a little overly legalese, and maybe a little intimidating for students. Other campuses have said, no, not a problem at all. You know, students who are coming to be reassessed just say, where do I sign? And it's not a problem. We are very open to, evaluating our processes and procedures, and this is year 1 of implementation. And we somewhat agree that it might be a little overly legalese. So we are going to take a look at it. And maybe for the next academic year, perhaps over the summer, we might take a stab at streamlining it a bit and making it a little more user-friendly. But for now, the affidavit that I just reviewed is the affidavit, an application that all students must use and all colleges and universities must also use to conduct the assessment of student eligibility. So moving to implementation, and then I will open it up for questions. The department is rolling out this new and exciting initiative in phases. Students assessed to be eligible for high school completer status will be deemed immediately eligible for the in-state tuition rate at all public higher education institutions, all community colleges, state universities, and the UMass campuses. They'll also be eligible for non-need-based tuition waivers, such as the Adams Scholarship, if otherwise eligible. Again, this removes any legal impediments with a student's immigration status. And students will immediately be eligible for all non-need-based financial aid programs, such as the foster and adoptive fee assistance waivers, if otherwise eligible under the terms of each program. Now, this immediate eligibility slide is really meant to signal that the benefit is immediately eligible for students who are currently enrolled at our public higher ed institution. We're signaling to institutions that they should reach out to their financial aid offices to seek to be reassessed and reclassified. And if they are reassessed and reclassified during this year 1 of implementation, then students' determinations will be retroactive to the beginning of the semester, or retroactive to July 1, 2023, if the student was perhaps in summer courses. So we are urging all students who are currently enrolled to reach out to their financial aid offices or advisors or admissions officers to find a way to be reclassified and access the benefits of this new law. Regarding access to need-based financial aid, that is financial aid programs that take into account a student or a student and a student family's income and expected family contribution. Since need-based determinations are based on the FAFSA and undocumented students aren't unable to complete the FAFSA, the department is working to develop a new tool, a state alternative FAFSA, to assess financial need for undocumented students that are attending public colleges and universities. Because unfortunately, without the state alternative FAFSA, we are unable to assess undocumented students' need for financial aid. So that will be the phase 2 rollout of the new law. The department anticipates that this alternative FAFSA is going to be available over the next several days, perhaps in the next week or so. We are trying to get it up and running and rolled out before January 1, before the beginning of the next semester. And again, as with the prior slide, eligibility determinations made during fiscal year 2024 for students who are reassessed, students who are already enrolled and are reassessed will be retroactive to the beginning of the semester or to July 1, 2023 if the student was enrolled in summer programs and is eligible. We do have a landing page on our website on tuition equity. So I encourage you to go to the Department of Higher Education's website to learn more. There you will find our implementation procedures, the application form and affidavit. We also drafted a sample notice that we are suggesting that our campuses use to reach out to students to get the word out and encourage them to come forward to be reassessed. And we have a list of frequently asked questions, which we are updating regularly, and we expect to be in a position to update them again next week. And when I do these sessions with Desi and others, we also keep track of some of the questions received. And unless they're one-off questions, we will also add them to our FAQ and post them on our website. So in that regard, I am going to open up to questions, but first, before we do that, Niall, I did go over our frequently asked questions, and I did pull some to go over here today because they are very frequent, and I thought that might help facilitate the conversation. So one question that we received early on was whether qualifying for in-state tuition meant that the student had automatic access to Massachusetts state financial aid. And the answer is yes, but I can't stress enough so there isn't any confusion that it is not an entitlement. It just means that the student is automatically eligible for consideration for state financial aid, subject to meeting the eligibility requirements for each financial aid program. And I just did a training with the financial aid officers too, in fact, earlier this week. So they get it as well, and they stand ready to help guide students through this process. If a currently enrolled student is reclassified with high school completer status, can the student seek a tuition adjustment for courses taken in previous year? Yes, the new provision became law as of July 1, 2023, with a retroactive date in the law. So this law can be used for any term that begins after that date, but the law cannot be used to change the tuition status for a student for any term beginning prior to July 1, 2023. Will a student be asked about their parents' immigration status, either on the application and affidavit form or on the state alternative FAFSA? This is a very important question, and the answer is an unequivocal and unambiguous no. For the purposes of the Massachusetts tuition equity law, the immigration status of a student's parents is completely immaterial. The student's immigration status is also largely immaterial, except that the provision is not available to students with certain immigration statuses that are specifically referenced in that law, in that 8 U.S. code that you saw in the prior slide, which is essentially those categories of immigration statuses that include diplomatic officials and those who are authorized to live, work, or study or visit here in the United States on a short-term temporary basis. What other ways can students be eligible for in-state tuition? This is important. As I indicated at the beginning of this presentation, the tuition equity law created an additional new pathway for students to be eligible for the in-state tuition rate. The existing pathway is still available to students. So students can also be eligible using the Board of Higher Education's residency policy. It's what we call the traditional pathway, pursuant to which the student must establish U.S. citizenship, lawful immigrant status, or lawful permanent resident status. That pathway and how to apply for that using that pathway is on our website. The reason that this is important is because there are some students who will not be eligible under the tuition equity law, but still may be eligible for the in-state tuition rate under the traditional pathway. And the students I'm thinking about now are perhaps other students who moved here but did not attend high school here for 3 years. They may have only attended high school here for 1 year or 2 years. They still may be eligible for the in-state tuition rate under the traditional pathway. So it's very important as high school guidance counselor that you're aware of that availability. And also refugee and asylum seekers, they may not be eligible under the new tuition equity law, but they may be eligible under the traditional pathway. So it's important to keep in mind additional pathways to make sure that we're maximizing students' access to this really important state benefit. Does the Massachusetts tuition equity law impact a student's eligibility for federal financial aid? No. The high school completer status in the tuition equity law does not change any federal requirements for federal forms or financial aid, such as Pell Grants or direct loans and the like. And then finally, and then I'll stop screen sharing and we can take a look at what questions we may have in the chat. How can students contact the department if they believe they were incorrectly classified or reclassified by their college or university? Consistent with our current student complaint process, students must first approach their institution, the institution that made the decision, to determine and follow the institution's own appeal process. And if the student remains unsatisfied and aggrieved after raising the issue with their institution, the student may reach out to the Department of Higher Education and submit their concerns through our complaint process. And there's a link on our website on how the student can do that. So I encourage you after the session to take a look at our website and reach out to us if you have any questions. We have an email set up specifically focused on tuition equity. It's tuitionequity@dhe.mass.edu. And we have staff members who are reviewing that email inbox daily to respond to questions or gather frequently asked questions for posting on our website. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it back to you, Niall or Lena, to facilitate a Q&A, or maybe I just take a look at the chat and let's see what's there.
So they're in the question and answer tab, and I'm happy to read them off as you read them to give yourself a chance to catch your thinking, to read them as and go in this particular order. There are a couple in here about adult students and about HiSET, so just kind of to get your mind flowing on that. So the first one is if a student moves to Massachusetts, doesn't attend high school, but earns HiSET/GED and meets the documentation requirements, are they considered a high school completer?
Unfortunately, no. The tuition equity law is very specific, and the student must have attended high school here for 3 years, in addition to receiving a diploma or the HiSET or GED in the Commonwealth. So unfortunately, they're not eligible for the high school completer status. They might be eligible under the traditional pathway. So I urge guidance counselors to review the traditional pathway with such students.
So just to follow that, my own curiosity, Mass Reconnect and tuition equity, is there a connection there?
Tuition equity is available to adult learners who are coming back to college. The high school, the 3 years of high school that is stated in the law does not have to happen consecutively, and it does not have to happen anytime in the past few years. It can happen 20 years ago, just to prove my point. So yes, high school completer status is eligible across the board to our adult learners, but the law is very specific. 3 years of high school attendance in Massachusetts and attainment of the diploma or GED or HiSET in Massachusetts.
So I think this has to do with a lot of the folks that we're talking to today have students who are current seniors or adult students. So in the wording says to submit the form to the institution they intend to be enrolled. Does this mean they can only submit to one college, or could they submit it to multiple to see the multiple aid offers they might be able to access?
They can submit it to multiple. We are rolling out the state alternative FAFSA very soon. I don't have the exact date, but we hope to do it within the next week or so. And that FAFSA only needs to be filled out once, and it will be accessible to all institutions. But unfortunately, the affidavit and form at this juncture needs to be submitted to each institution where the student is applying. We'll look at trying to streamline that in subsequent years. but we did have to roll this out very quickly. The law kind of snuck up on us, and we came up with implementation procedures and processes very quickly to be in place for this academic year.
So current seniors cannot submit this document yet.
No, they can. They
Okay,
can. They can submit the affidavit. The state alternative FAFSA will be available soon. It's not available yet, but that'll be available in the coming weeks.
another question at selective service. Does this mean that some campuses are not asking for proof of selective service registration and basically ignoring this?
I can't speak to that. I know that it's a requirement on the FAFSA, but some students don't fill out the FAFSA. I know that selective service is a requirement even for undocumented students, but it's not the institution's responsibility to follow up on that. Under the tuition equity law, however, it is a condition currently. It is a condition of accessing state benefits under the high school tuition. The high school completion status law.
I imagine I know the answer to this because it's a federal issue and not a state issue, but does this process help fast track citizenship for eligible students?
No, it does not. It does not impact citizenship processes or citizenship decisions.
And back to this one, is there an age limit?
No age limit. Well, no age limit. Just again, high school completion, high school attendance. Adult learners are welcome and encouraged to use this new pathway.
Okay, and again, around the adult learners, as a follow-up, they still need to have that 3 years of Massachusetts high school sometime in their academic career, to John Hanlon's question.
That's correct, and it does not need to be consecutive, but you need 3 years high
Is
school
there any
attendance.
thought that you've heard from our legislators about adding in adult students around GED high set?
No, that is not currently under discussion. This is the part, I get this question often, and this is the part where I kind of nerd out on federal law, but basically by it, and this is 24 other states have the same law where they require high school attendance in their state for either 2 years or 3 years. That's actually an indirect way of proving residency in that state, showing that the student was physically present in that state for a couple of years, whether it's 2 or 3 years. So to my knowledge, there's no discussion of changing that rule because that's very foundational to all tuition equity laws across the country.
Great.
I'm going to ask a question because usually the follow-up question I get, so it might already be there, it might not, is whether homeschool students are eligible for the tuition equity law. And the answer is yes. But with that, we have different documentation requirements, and we simply require the student to submit proof that they are an authorized homeschool student under they have a district plan, basically, that their district approved their homeschool status.
This is a long one. So students can receive the in-state tuition rate, but still need to figure out how to raise funds to pay that tuition, correct? I have 10 newcomer students who are graduating next year, and it's going to be hard to raise funds for all of them to attend college. Is there a way to allow students who have been here to apply for FAFSA? And FAFSA is a whole different thing that if they're undocumented, they would not be able to.
So the good news is, so the students can receive the in-state tuition rate, but the students will also be eligible for state financial aid programs. So they will be able, instead of applying for the FAFSA, which requires, I think, a social security number and requires citizenship, we have developed an alternative FAFSA. Excuse me, I think we're calling it the MASFA. And the students will be able to apply for state financial aid, whether it's Mass Grant Expansion, Mass Reconnect. Whether they're eligible depends on the student's individual facts and circumstances. But that is new, that is exciting, and we hope that we have some broad reach there, so that students can afford to go to college and university under this new law.
Just for my friend Catherine in Boston, if a student has attended a Massachusetts high school for 24 months rather than 36 months, and they graduated with a Massachusetts high school diploma, what would be the process in order for that student to meet these requirements? Wait 36 months?
Waiting 36 months won't cure this. Unfortunately, under the law, the rule is that the student must have attended a Massachusetts high school for 3 years. We don't talk about it in terms of month, but basically 3 high school years. Maybe look at the alternative pathway to see if the student is eligible under the current traditional pathway to access the in-state tuition rate.
If a student transfers from one state school to another, will they need to submit a new affidavit to the new school to establish in-state tuition eligibility?
Yes, I want to say unfortunately, yes, but it is because the in-state tuition rates determinations are made at the institutional level at this time. We are requiring the students to submit the affidavit to each school where they transfer. We'll take a look at whether we should change that, but a couple of the institutions actually wanted to have that ability to review the decisions for each of the students that are enrolled in their or transferred to their institution.
How can counselors best direct a student to whether they should be filling out the FAFSA or the MAFSA, the FAFSA alternative?
It's my understanding that, well, first, if you know that the student is undocumented, then you should direct them directly to the MASFA. And it's my understanding that the MASFA is going to have the first 2 questions of the MASFA will help assess whether the student should continue to fill out the MASFA or if they should be kicked over to the FAFSA. And basically, if the student has a social security number or a taxpayer ID number, then the student will be told, stop, wait, don't fill out this one. You should be filling out the FAFSA.
Thank you. And this is Adam from One Goal. For high school seniors currently interested in pursuing higher education, do they need to complete all forms with the institutions they plan to attend? In other words, should those students wait to receive an acceptance before completing the affidavit?
I'm going to ask that I hold on that one, and I'm going to take a look at it, and we will add that to our frequently asked questions. I got that question the other day, and we're looking at, and we're going to speaking with institutions, we're looking at whether it would be wise to have students complete the affidavit with their application form, or if they should complete the affidavit after they're admitted. There's some confidentiality issues that we're considering in that context, so I need to have continuing conversations on that, so stay tuned on that one.
That might answer Laura's question as well. Do students still qualify if they transfer from a private university to a public in-state university after their first year?
Yes. Again, the law is very specific. It's very focused on whether the student attended high school here for 3 years and got a diploma or GED. They still qualify. Going to a private does not cancel out their eligibility. Can I do my own follow-up question there?
Sure.
The other thing too is students who might have attended private high school here, but perhaps lived in another state, perhaps New Hampshire, or, Rhode Island, they're actually eligible under the in-state tuition law as well. Again, it's just high school attendance in Massachusetts for 3 years. Go ahead, back to you now.
I'm not really familiar with community college foundation funds. I assume that this is a private fund, but don't know. Would students be eligible for community colleges foundations funds?
It's unlikely because community colleges foundation funds are considered state benefits, considered state funding. Well, that's a really broad question. Is the question, would undocumented students be eligible for community college foundation funds? That's how I read it. So all students are eligible for community college foundation funds depending on the facts and circumstances and if the student meets the eligibility requirements. But undocumented students are not supposed to be eligible for community college foundation funds because it is a state benefit, but they will become eligible under high school completer status because high school completer status removes the immigration impediment. I'm sorry if that was confusing and got too legalese for you, but the question was a little vague.
She was speaking to undocumented students.
Yeah, okay.
And folks, feel free to put some more questions in because I think we're down to our last one, which is unbelievable. If a student is not currently enrolled in college but are hoping to enroll this spring, would they be eligible starting January 2024?
Yes.
Yes, I like that. And a little clarification about refugee and asylum seekers and their eligibility for tuition equity.
So I'm not an immigration lawyer, so this is not my strong point. But speaking with the immigration advocates, it was their understanding that it would be more beneficial for refugee and asylum seekers to apply under the traditional pathway. I think that I can't speak to the facts and circumstances of each individual, but it's probable that refugee and asylum seekers would be eligible under the traditional pathway if they have the correct immigration documentation.
To use FAFSA itself?
Well, that would be for the in-state tuition rate. It would not be, so that's a very good follow-up question now. It would not be for state financial aid, but it would be for the in-state tuition rate.
Right.
You could, if you have a student who's a refugee or asylum seeker and you're unclear, you could send them over to MIRA, the Massachusetts Immigration and Refugee Advocates. They've been a wonderful partner in rolling out this law, and they might help guide the student to the right pathway and additional options.
We are getting more questions about refugee and migrants. The immigration status can be a little bit challenging, so I would go to MIRA or someone else who can really help with that status, and it probably doesn't behoove us to answer very specific questions about TPS or asylum or refugees or that type of thing, because migrants is a big word.
Let me add that we will be updating our website soon with some user-friendly immigration status lists that will help you understand what immigration statuses are not eligible for the high school completer pathway and are eligible for the traditional pathway. I will say under the traditional pathway, which is only for the in-state tuition rate, unfortunately, but good because it at least is the in-state tuition rate. Students who have a work permit are eligible for the in-state tuition rate, so that helps at least a little bit. But yeah, I can't get into too many immigration type of questions, but I can promise you that we'll do our best to update our website with some guidance.
Yeah, a couple more questions about traditional pathway and what what that means. The definition.
So it's on our website and it's called the BHE residency policy. And I currently have a staff member who's working on a user-friendly chart, which will show you the difference between the traditional pathway and the high school completer pathway. But you can find it on our website under in-state tuition, and BHE residency policy.
Can students fill out the MAFSA before providing an affidavit to one institution? They choose intend to attend. Will students get a report of their financial aid eligibility from MAFSA, something like an SAR report?
I'm not familiar with the SAR report, but the student can fill out the MAFSA before providing an affidavit to any institution to which they intend to apply.
And more about selective service, if this
they will get, I'm sorry, I'm thinking while reading. I mean, they will get, I think they'll get some, right now the FAFSA speaks in terms of expected family contribution. We know that's going to change next year. But they will get a report on their EFC so that they or their counselors can help assess their eligibility for financial aid programs.
So a little more clarification around selective service. If there's a requirement, does that mean students need to have at least a green card to apply?
No.
Question is no. Okay, so this is if they have to apply for selective service, they must have. I'm repeating back the way I understand it to see if that makes sense.
No, they just have to show that they've registered for selective service. And my understanding, we have something on our website in the FAQ that says it's just as simple as showing that, like, you went to the post office and you applied. You don't even have to show that you're registered.
Something you said something about private high schools, New Hampshire and Rhode Island, about being eligible for tuition equity. How is this possible if they're not Mass residents?
That's a really good question. So the tuition equity law does not speak in terms of Massachusetts residency, and that's for federal law requirements. It is very specific It's leveling the playing field for high school attendees, for high school students. So all students who attended high school in Massachusetts, public or private, for 3 years, at least 3 years, and got a diploma or GED or HiSET in Massachusetts are eligible for tuition equity. Basically, attending high school in Massachusetts satisfies what we used to call the Massachusetts residency requirement.
What was that? So this might have been answered already, but what documents do students need to be Pell eligible? And I imagine it needs to be, FAFSA eligible for the Pell eligible.
Correct. A student needs to complete the FAFSA, which means a student needs to be eligible to complete the FAFSA. Mhm.
More about the high school completer documentation for a student who left school and received a GED HiSET. They may have been in high school roles, but missed a great deal of school and did not pass classes during those 3 years. So is it enrolled for 3-year period, or is it 3 years of credit, or what does that mean?
I have not gotten that question yet. It just says attended high school for 3 years.
If I were to guess on this, it probably means being in 3 October Sims periods in grades 9 through 12. That would be our definition.
I am so glad that you're partnering with us on Nile, and I might ask you to help draft a FAQ on this one, and we can put it on our website. We will take Desi's definition on this one.
And this is a good question. I think you answered this already. Are undocumented students putting themselves at risk by filling out these forms?
I'm such a lawyer. I feel like I'm being deposed on how I answer these questions. I can't speak to the level of risk, but I can say that all institutions are supposed to keep the information they receive confidential. Under FERPA, institutions are not supposed to share PII of students. And we are asking student institutions to keep the information confidential to the maximum extent allowable under state or federal law.
So the high school attendance requirement is to determine residency, but does not determine residency if you live out of state.
Pretty much what I said before, the high school attendance requirement is to basically substitute for someone having to show residency documentation in Massachusetts. And it was determined here and in 24 other states that if you show that you were physically present here for 3 years of high school, that is sufficient to make you eligible for the in-state tuition rate. Some might call my high school example a loophole in the law. That may be one way to look at it, but it also is just a way of leveling the playing field and being really clear. If you go to high school here for 3 years, you are eligible for the in-state tuition rate and for state financial aid. And that's the bottom line.
Okay. I think we're down to our last question. Someone comes out under the wire. If a student completes the affidavit, we're back to selective service. They could skip the selective service option since they only have to meet one of the 4 requirements. Is that correct?
No, unfortunately, and we are going to review this with the legislature. The selective service requirement is in the law twice. So aside from that list of 4 on the documentation requirements, all students who are eligible to sign up for selective service must show that they applied for selective service or registered. Now that application will satisfy the documentation requirement. So they don't have to submit a social security number or taxpayer ID number. And technically they don't have to sign the affidavit swearing that they will apply for citizenship if and when they become eligible to do so. It is a peculiar thing in the law, but it is currently the state of the law.
What about documented students whose families are here on a visa for 3 years? Do they get in-state tuition also? I don't really understand the question. But...
You have to look at the visa of the student because students who are here on one of those temporary visas that's specifically excluded in the law are not eligible to use high school completer status to access in-state tuition. And again, we're going to try to put up on our website a user-friendly guide on those categories of immigration statuses that are not eligible for use of the high school completer status law.
think that's all for our questions. Unless there's something coming into the wire. I want to really, Dina, unless you have some final words, or Elena, I really want to thank you for presenting to our folks. We have a recording here. I know there's a lot of people who just signed up so they can get the recording. If you're listening to me, here's the recording, and I hope you got the answers you needed. And for the rest of you, thank you for attending, and keep your ear close to all the good work that's coming out of DHE around college affordability and college access, because there's great things to come. And I want to thank you all for presenting
Thank
today.
you. Just one quick thing. I just want to thank Elena for helping to manage the Zoom. And
Yes.
also I see that she added a lot of links in the chat. So if folks have access to that, yeah, it looks like it's accessible to everyone. You'll see links to the Mira Coalition's website, also a link to our current traditional pathway, the residency policy. And I do urge you all to take a look at our website from time to time. We will be updating it with additional information. So
And as
thank
we
you.
get more updates, we're going to get them through the department and also through MASCA and Bob's partnership over there to make sure everyone's hearing all the information they need to help their kids.
That'd be great. And in particular, when we pull together this graphic or chart that my staff are working on to show the difference between the traditional pathway and the high school completer pathway, I'll send it over to Desi. I'll send it over to you now so you can circulate that with folks, because I think that'll be a really helpful document.
And Dina, can you send over your slides at some point so I can share?
Sure.
With them? All right, great. All right, we'll send out slides and recordings to all registrants. Thanks again. Our best for the holidays, and be good to yourselves.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.